Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Chris Mabry, the GM here at PreSales Collective, and I couldn't be more excited about hosting with Tony and John today. So Tony and John are going to discuss today's compensation report. So this is a consensus report that's had a huge amount of I don't know what the word to put it, but we've broken the webinar registration number here at PreSales Collective. So we crushed the record at over 400. We really appreciate your guys' interest in this. For those of you that can join us just a little bit, don't worry. This is being recorded. It will be sent to you afterwards. And like I said before, we're going to be using the Q&A function. Please don't be shy. All of us have done presentations before where we don't get any questions, and that's never fun. So please throw all your questions in the Q&A. We're happy to answer them. And I'd like to give a huge thank to our sponsors, Consensus, today. They're the ones who made this happen. They do incredible research. I know that I've used the compensation guide myself. Tony's going to share how he's actually slayed the dragon with this tool. And with that, I'd like to introduce you over to John Cook, VP of Marketing at Consensus. Go ahead and take it away, bud.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate it. Really happy to be here. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We're very excited about it. Tony and I have grown matching beards for the occasion, just for you guys. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over as an introduction to this. I'm going to only take a brief moment for those who maybe aren't familiar with the compensation report yet, to give a brief introduction to that before we hand it over to Tony for the good stuff. So here is, I'm just going to walk through the high points here. We're going to use the actual report itself as the source material. So this is the 4th year that we've done this report. We did the first one in 2020, and it took off so well that it's just become a staple and a pillar of our research. I'm going to jump through the beginnings here. The report starts with a little bit of demographics. The report, by the way, is over 90 pages all told. So there's a lot in there to jump through, but hopefully it's organized in such a way that it's not overwhelming. Demographics as far as the kind of people that are answering, the industries that they serve, the product types, and so on. They're overwhelmingly software or a combination of software and professional services. And there's some hardware in there too. And then we go through some more things about like how much experience the respondents have and those sorts of things. One thing you'll notice is that the report is not, it's not just a snippet of just one finding or things like that. We actually supply the histograms and so on. So we begin the report with the compensation section of the report, which is, I think, kind of the punchline that a lot of people are often looking for. And so we start with median salaries, median on-target earnings, and so on by region, as well as we give medians and means and the mins and the max and what the end number was, and whether people are carrying quota, stock options. We really go deep here to where you can see what the stack looks like for both individual contributors and leaders. And you'll notice this throughout the report that it's usually just separated into individual contributors and leaders for many of the responses. So then we go by region and years of experience. We start off by years of experience, and then we transition to a few other predicting factors. Obviously, experience is a big determiner of OTE. Bigger deals, meaning higher earnings, not a huge surprise there. Larger firms tend to pay more. Higher earners actually report a lower AE to SE ratio, and there are other things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead here. Because we deal a lot with different regional distributions, to where the intent is that you can jump in and you can really get granular and find those audiences, those subsets of the sample that are most relevant to you. But then we jump ahead to workload, and workload covers things like the hours that ICs and leaders are working, and what determines, for instance, higher earnings from a workload perspective. So frequent crunch weeks might predict higher earnings for leaders, but not for ICs on an average basis, right? This is over a large sample. By the way, a little bit about the methodology here. This isn't just dropping all of the data into a spreadsheet and then finding the mean or the median. We actually have a data scientist from a university in Ohio who comes in and does Forshaw transforms and really controls for noise and determining factors, and all of these are insights that have surfaced after going through a very robust analysis to control for that noise, to control for those anomalies that might crop up if we were to just, grab the straight median of the results. Other things that you'll see more on crunch weeks, the max hours that people are working. Here's one of my favorite portions of the workload report that has surfaced. This is our first year reporting on this. We asked people to rate the functions that they go through in pre-sales by the amount of time that gets spent on them. Okay, and those rankings are over here on the left. And then we asked them to rank those same activities in order of the impact that they have on their bottom line. So higher impact activities are rated at the top, lowest impact activities are rated at the bottom, and then we compared them, right? So over here on the left, we see that we're spending most of our time on technical demos and discovery, and then intro demos, planning, architecting solutions, all the way down to, on average, RFPs sit down here toward the bottom, and then other. If we rank functions by impact, over here at the top, we see discovery. And this, by the way, is we have 2 years of data on this now, and discovery consistently ranks at the top as far as its impact by function. So discovery is number 1. Technical demos are consistently number 2. But then as we analyze this, we see that there are a couple of rogues, okay? The first rogue is product knowledge improvement, ranks near the bottom as far as the amount of time that is typically devoted to it, and only 4th from the top as far as its impact. So that's one of those areas that we identified that, for instance, we need to be spending more time on. That is, SEs and leaders are reporting that this is a high impact activity that is not getting its due as far as the amount of time we're devoting to it. The other rogue is intro demos. They rank 3rd from the top as far as the amount of time they absorb, and only 3rd from the bottom as far as their overall impact on the bottom line. They're kind of you might call those a necessary evil. After all, you can't not do a demo, right, for a prospect. But the actual impact that they have, the actual impact that those intros demos have is considered minimal, and that's one of the big key findings that we found in this workload report. Jumping ahead, and I'll just give a quick shout out to some of the rest of these. We have a section on demos and how we have a word cloud indicating tech stack and so on as well. And then we go to demos, where we discuss how long people are waiting for demos, and what things determine the wait time for a demo. We talk about work hours per demo and unqualified demos, and we look at the distributions there. And then we added a new section this year on burnout. And burnout, this is the first year that we measured this, but we found some very interesting predictors of burnout in the pre-sales community. So the percentages that look like that report feeling some symptoms of burnout, and then we've modeled some of the causes of burnout and what appears to drive those, and the intent to leave within these different teams and so on. So you can see what the primary drivers of burnout are as far as the misallocation of resources, things like that. So I'm not going to dwell any more on the report here. These are just some highlights and what you can expect to find in it. The team, it's gone from me writing the report, which would happen in the first couple of years, to now I've got a really crack team of pre-sales industry analysts and so on that are just doing a great job on this. So encourage everybody to, big shout out to Crystal Burrick, who was the primary author of this year's report. So over to you, Tony, and I'll let you talk about how you can use this to actually accomplish the things you want to accomplish in your team.
Right. No, and thanks, John. There was one question that came through from Joanna about the data that supports the impact of those activities. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the rank order of responses of those who took the survey, correct? To say like which activities have the most impact.
Yes, so we asked all of the respondents to rank order those activities, and then we took all of the responses of everybody across the team, and we gave and we assigned the values that would give it, essentially weight them in the place where they fell according to all responses across the entire set. So those are essentially the average positions, if you will, of where those items fell according to the broad data set. And it's remarkably robust, by the way. You can analyze that in about 8 different ways, and they still come out in the same order. So that's a robust data set for rank ordering those activities.
It's impressive, John. I mean, it's like the amount of data is, I wouldn't say it's overwhelming. It's just like, it's impressive how much work you guys have put into that.
It can be overwhelming, but if you actually look at the report, there's a table of contents. You can usually jump directly to just the bit that you want to see, and you don't have to necessarily parse the whole thing.
Well, Tony, I'm excited to hear your story because, I think the value is like, we have the data, and this is really how you approached actually using this in your organization in real life. And that's why I was so excited to have you guys on.
Yeah, and it was great to kind of parallel into like the end of title that we had landed with was this compensation compass and how you can leverage information like the comp and workload report to kind of make that compensation leap. So no, I'm happy we kind of connected on this and figured out what was the right path. Just a little bit about me. I'm the Senior Manager of Solution Consulting at Thomson Reuters in the Tax and Accounting Division. Label myself as a passionate pre-sales advocate on LinkedIn, but really this is something that I've leaned into. And ultimately, when you look at what impact pre-sales teams can have, large scale, it really jumps into, well, how are they paid? And we mentioned a whole slaying the dragon, right? But the workload report that John was referencing there, and I use the first 2 years of reports in the story that I'll go through here, that acted as my quote unquote sword in this story. And while pre-sales folks in general, like, we're storytellers at heart, and this might not be as a glorious a story as the sword and the stone is, but really, like, it was a lot of fun to see this progress, and wasn't a quick and easy done, one and done process. I got turned down the first year that I approached it and had to reset and go there a second year to actually get this through fruition. But excited to tell you a little bit about it and how really that the report did play a big role in justifying compensation increases for my team. So when we think about what challenges face a pre-sales organization, the one that we want to all focus on is compensation. How are we paid, and are we paid justly for the work that we do? And if you think about the main challenges that we run into, and I think this impacts why there's such a variance in that compensation page of the report where it's talking about individual contributors, the variance is wild. It's up into the 500,000 down to the teens. It's really crazy how wide that spectrum can be. But I looked at it in these 4 main areas. First and foremost, how many titles are out there? That's a message that we've talked about for years now, about sales engineers. Solutions consulting is my team's group. There's pre-sales engineers. We used to be called sales infrastructure, right? There's a myriad of those that are out there. And I think because of that, and I would say put it in the chat, but I don't think we got the chat there. So I'm curious of like the different types of titles that are available or that everybody is using in the group here. But along with those myriad of titles, what are the duties that are assigned to those? Right? And think about how that impacts your compensation. If there's no clear guidance around what the expectation of the role is and what impact they can have, well, of course, there's such a wide variance in that compensation. So leverage that report as a way to kind of, figure out where you land in that scale, and then look at what can you justify from there. That leads into my second point around unrecognized impact. what is the impact your team has, not just on the sales division, but other parts of the organization? How is that documented? Right? There are things that we don't do well. I didn't do well when I started off. I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I didn't do this very well to begin with because my team was just perceived of as the demo team. And the more we looked at the data that we pull in, we influence a whole lot more than just the sales process. Where does the pre-sales team fit in the org? So allocation of budget becomes a big part of that. Are they part of sales? Are they professional services? I was in training consulting when we first started, and then we migrated into the sales division. And now I'm on a standalone go-to-market team that's not embedded with either of those. So we've transitioned through multiple divisions, but budget becomes a big part of that conversation in determining what your ROI is. And then to a lesser extent, the time to ramp, but it ended up being a pretty big part of the business case that I did about why now, when you're going to expand a pre-sales team or build a different structure, the importance of the time spent. I made the argument in mine, we provide a pretty integral function in the sales division. We engage with customers, connect the value of the offerings. There's a lot of information that we share, but in my case, where our organization, we've got about 15 major products that we deliver on. To scale a solutions consultant up to be able to deliver the full bag, you're talking 2 to 3 years in our case. Now, there's a really great point in the report about this too, of what's the time to ramp a customer. And we've gone back and forth, and John and I have talked about this too. How can you justify the time to ramp? Is that for a single product? Is it for all products that you offer? And so even that question itself can be taken in a certain context too. So, I think the long-term impact of this, when you have that 2 to 3 years ramp for senior type resources, they get to that level of skill, they deliver well, they get requested by the top sales reps. And then if they realize they're at that pinnacle and you don't see that increase in compensation, well, then they look to the market, which pre-sales is an industry that we all know it's hot. People want to join this group, and there's a lot of groups out there that are adding people at a large scale. Now, I don't know, and this is a question I guess I would throw to Chris and John too. I'm seeing a trend actually in the opposite. I had lost 4 of my team over to another company for a significantly bigger base salary, and they've since downsized in the last 2 years. And some of those folks actually did get downsized in the process because they were low man on the totem pole. But are you seeing any of that trend happen?
I mean, you just have to go on LinkedIn to see that trend, striking. It was a rough thing. There was, growth was rampant through 2021 and 2022, and teams grew massively. And then, obviously the headwinds hit and everybody got spooked. So it was what I'm seeing is a more dramatic rise and then an immediate kind of hit that everything took. So
Yeah, same here. I mean, I lost people on my team because of our OTE structure, and then the challenge is if you move in a volatile market and you're the last one in, you may be the first one out, and so we experienced a handful of those. I think it's hard to find that perfect line of building your team for growth and not overbuilding it, and that's what we ran into.
Yeah, ultimately, I think, and it's interesting now because we kind of get this weird shift from that giant scale up to then all right, we're going to find a plateau and we're going to kind of balance out. But I think ultimately, when you look at how this feeds into compensation and kind of the process that I took, you got to understand the challenges that you face. It's key to crafting the business case that you're trying to make. So I break these down into a couple little pieces. When you talk about overcoming that lack of clarity in the role, what I ended up doing was looking at the divisions that used my teams frequently. So in our case, I ended up putting into a pretty basic spreadsheet. And what is the percentage of time that I spent working on projects, or the team spent rather, working on projects with other divisions, whether that was sales enablement to assist with the training side, product marketing for messaging and strategy, sales directly, that's a big component of it too. But what were those tactics? Was it training sales? Was it just delivering demos? Those are all things. And I think the more that you can clarify the impact that you're making outside of the organizational structure that you're defined to, So at the time, this is sales, right? So you'd think the bulk of the time was spent to sales. Depending on the time of the year, now ours is pretty cyclical with the tax season, so we're slower January to April, and then we're really ramped up the remainder of the year. It was, heavy on the other side of like training and working with sales enablement and other divisions in the pre-part of the season and training sales. And then it was slightly higher, but really ended up being more like a 60-40 split. In some cases, depending on the time of the year, it was more time spent outside of sales. And I think that was a critical component to consider as well. When I say break the perceptions of senior leaders per se, like I think this is something that most organizations face when you go up to the chain of the C-suite. Some don't necessarily know what pre-sales is and the impact that it can have. Now you've got great leaders in this space. I point to Todd Jansen often in terms of Salesforce and the voice that he has in the industry, but there's still companies that don't recognize the impact that pre-sales can have. And they're in this phase of trying to grow and understand how do you have better impact on the company at large. So I looked in advance of my pitch to the president of my division, go to the stakeholders involved and help them understand rather, what's that impact going to be for them? The same way we talk about, we want to use consensus videos to get all necessary stakeholders on the same page of the base information to review, reduce those level of intro demos, seek to find that same process and communicate what you're hoping for from those stakeholders. So when the time comes, you make your pitch and then they're going to go back to those stakeholders to help make the decision. You've already got people working on your side. And I think positioning your team in such a way can help bolster that support from the ground up. And then the last piece is the team, right? We talk about when customers are implementing our solutions, oftentimes if the decision maker is the only one that's involved in that process, you may have some internal challenges in adoption. So you can't just say, well, I'm going to have us involved in everything around the company without communicating that to your teams too. I've always gone to this mindset of how can I help? And I wanted the team culture to be very similar, where if there's a need elsewhere in the organization and we can fill that need, then we should do it. Should it be the long-term answer forever? No, but make that value add by just stepping in and doing what's necessary. I didn't face, everybody in my team with roaring support that we were going to do more than just demos. So it was a challenge to kind of communicate that as I looked to expand that scope of the team beyond just the demos. And some were hesitant and others were really seeing that same vision that I had. And it's been a process over the last several years. So, in terms of the clarity piece, ultimately, if you can narrow this into where you make an impact in the organization beyond just the sales division, in addition to, not beyond, but in addition to the sales division, get your stakeholders involved and make sure you're communicating things to your team. That's going to be a really good path to follow, similar to my approach. The impact of where your team is, this kind of expands on that whole, not having the C-suite understand maybe where the value of the team truly lies. And I'm pretty sure at this point I could recite my impact statement blindfolded upside down and underwater, right? But the way that I typically approach saying like, well, what is pre-sales? What does your team do? We fit nowhere in an organization, in my opinion. The go-to-market space that I'm in now is really where I feel like it's the best fit, because you influence everybody. And I say that because to do the job effectively, the team has to know several things related to other divisions. So marketing messaging to be consistent with what customers are going to find in a website. You've got to have the product roadmaps to make sure and communicate the vision and the long-term strategy. You have to align on value proposition. So there's the strategy component that builds into it. The competitors and the industry to stay on top of trends and know how to present the value. You've got to have sales acumen. You've got to have presentation skills. Oh yeah. And then you've got to know the products too. So there's this wide range of things that solutions consultants do effectively. But I challenge everybody to say, does your C-suite understand that level of impact? Could you give that elevator pitch and talk about it, where we have to be up to speed on all of those things to be effective as a solution consultant, sales engineer, pre-sales space? But can you say the same for any of those other groups? And that's where this kind of influencer concept of like, where can we add value and where's the true impact of where solutions consultants can bring, It's making sure that marketing, where if they're going to focus on, producing MQLs for the sales division, well, sure, that's their goal. And they all have KPIs. They all have goals, just like product marketing or product or whatever groups are involved across the board. How can we leverage that? Because we need information to stay up to date on those trends and information. We also have information to share that because we've got the prospective customers and their insights and what they like and they don't like about our solutions and their own. So it's that kind of reciprocal relationship where if you can communicate that impact more clearly to other leaders in divisions that aren't directly related to the one that you're a part of, that can help to really drive that process home to, reinstate, okay, if we're going to be involved with these projects, if we're going to communicate these things to these groups and spend time coordinating effort with them, well, what does that mean to the scope of the role? And then back into that compensation piece.
If I may interject there just for a minute,
Go for
Tony,
it. Yeah.
To that point, consider the cocktail of expertise that you just described in pre-sales from a buyer perspective. Is there anyone else that you really want to talk to? I submit that there isn't. And the way I know that is because at the risk of completely shattering my credibility, I'm a marketing guy. And so I can tell you that website after website, if you go there and you look at the carrot that marketing dangles in front of their prospects, it is a button that says what? Book a demo. All right. There is only one person, other than maybe to get pricing, but there's only one person that prospects really want to talk to. And I'm super passionate about this, so forgive me if I geek out, but I submit that pre-sales is absolutely, at least what pre-sales provides is absolutely at the core of what buyers need in selling motions going forward. We're big on buyer enablement and consensus, and that impact cannot be overstated, in my opinion.
Yeah, great points, John. And I mean, to add to this is like, Tony, I think to break down what I've heard so far is you're talking about brand, right? Like the internal brand. And I've said this a lot, every organization I've gone to, it's like the people in the organization don't know what we do. So you have to rebrand yourself internally first. And you have to do that in a way that says we are a go-to-market team. We're not just a pre-sales demo team. Everybody who comes to our website and wants to talk to us. We write the best blogs. We do the best webinars. We do the best events. We're the best people at the trade show, right? So you have to rebrand yourself to be that hub and spoke go-to-market team to then go and ask for that budget, right? So it's like you have to start doing that work way before the quarterly budget approval comes around.
And it's a really valid point, because I think as much as there may not be that true recognition of it, you also have to be really cautious in how you communicate that. I was speaking candidly to a VP in another division and talking about some of the challenges and getting that buy-in from other organizational segments to use my team or leverage the information that they have. And it was more of a candid discussion. And she mentioned to me, she said, I know that this is your passion coming through in where you're trying to make a difference, but be careful that you're not perceived as, well, sales enablement isn't as good as we are, or professional services isn't as good as we are, right? And then you're positioning kind of like this who's better than who story. Avoid that, right? Because this is all about having an influence and an impact to help the overall organization grow. And a lot of the ways that's through the sales channel, but similar to what you just mentioned, Chris, right? Like this is the team where we garner that information. We're working through those discovery calls with the sales team. We understand the needs of the customers, what they like and they don't like. That's valuable. Whether that's Salesforce verbatims, whether that's, information on a quarterly meeting that we put together, whatever it is, that's a valuable piece. And I think as long as it's, how can we help you and your other segment, your other division meet your goals and be successful? And in turn, for us to be successful, we don't have all the time to spend, John, on the marketing process. We're not building campaigns. We're not coordinating that messaging. But should we all have that same understanding? Yeah. And that's where there is a reciprocal part of this, where you can share insights, you can gain information from the other divisions, and everybody wins. Cool.
100%.
All right. I mentioned earlier in terms of the budget piece, and this is one that can be challenging because depending on part of the organization that you're a part of, it's hard to determine what's that ROI mean, right? Is it overall revenue influence? Is it time to close deals? Is it number of deals? That was something that I struggled with initially, just to understand the specific impact, because like in our case, we weren't tied into Salesforce. We didn't have an overlay like Vivint or something to run some reports like that. It was really a manual process. And truthfully, because we didn't own the sale, that's the sales rep, I had a really hard time holding my team to a closing percentage number as part of their own goals. So I worked through like, well, everybody's got to understand how they determine ROI, and how does elsewhere in the organization determine the true ROI of a pre-sales team. And part of that is just asking the sales leaders, like, what is necessary? What do they feel like is the biggest impact that we bring to the table? And, John has it in the report there too. Discovery was number one, technical demo was number two. Sure, that's the core function of the job. The remainder of those things, though, still do have an impact. So having that I guess, understanding and consistency of ROI proof by way of whatever tools that you use. I've been able to use consensus pretty well in my case. It changed how we did business ultimately, but it's things like that where it did shorten our sales cycle. It did increase the deal value, and all of that leveraged into, look, this is what we bring to the table. Here's how we're compensated today. Here's the impact that we have. And is there a disconnect? Maybe in your own research, you're going to find that there's not a big disconnect based on what those expectations are. But then it's putting the plan in place to, again, how do you redesign your structure to then increase your impact, to then advocate for more compensation too. Everything that we do try to revenue. I always joke around, like whenever we pull together our sales trainings, it's all about how do you get sales reps to make more money. And if everything is framed in that way, then they can respond to a little bit. But the solutions consultant role, pre-sales, sales engineer, it really does. It provides customers and prospects and sales reps with the technical information, the advice, demonstrations, on-site, web-based, meetings, sales seminars, trade shows, conferences, right? All of that, they influence the sales operation. And that can be coordinating with marketing. It can be coordinated with the training side of the house. All of it leads back into more revenue. You can talk about product development, right? If we're client facing and we can influence a roadmap, well, that means the sales reps can position that value add in the roadmap sooner, make more sales, right? And you can make that argument to feed everything back into it. And I think because we've got that product knowledge and experience, we're uniquely positioned to influence and educate the development of not only the sales floor, but the rest of the company too. Sales enablement, that's a team we partner with very frequently as well. Customer proposition, to understand what the value prop is and does it hit the mark with what we're hearing, is from the customers, and the overall strategy for our go-to-market plan. So tie everything back into how it's going to benefit those divisions, and then revenue for the company at large. And that's going to help in terms of just understanding how that budget's going to play. The last one here, this took me a little bit of time to learn. I saw this from the vantage point that we're in, and kind of like I went through that rundown of all the places that we can impact. It's like, well, yeah, we can. This is great. It's awesome. My team's amazing. And you kind of have to put the effort in first and show what your value is before you can go to the table and say, okay, now here's where we talk about how this impact can be. Because as soon as you start to say, we have the potential to do X, Y, or Z, and we should be paid accordingly, well, we haven't produced yet. So you do have to, provide that value up front. Don't ask for anything in return. Build a report for whoever out of market, Salesforce verbatims on trends that you're seeing from customer, and share that with the other teams. Don't do it with a carrot attached to it of, oh yeah, and this is going to help me make my numbers. No, it's all about providing the impact. Make your team and the information that it provides invaluable to part of those other divisions' processes. And then when it comes time to make a case for the compensation increase, those buy-in from the other organization segments are already there. The buy-in exists.
Yeah, epic, Tony. Piece of housekeeping, we have enabled the chat live. And
Woo-hoo!
so you just click the little drop down and select everyone. if you wouldn't mind typing in where you're joining from, maybe the title that you're going with, which is what Tony was asking
Yeah,
for.
that'd be a great one. Yeah, thank you. That's awesome. Yeah, Vegas, New Jersey, Ireland. Well, welcome. Across
Ireland.
the pond. All right.
It's in O'Sullivan too.
Yeah, not very many of those over there. So no, that's fantastic too. And yeah, thanks for getting that back up and running. There's the chats flowing through. Perfect. Okay. Yeah.
Ottawa, Bay Area.
Solutions consultant, SE. Yep. So solution architect. Yeah, and it's so funny to me because we always ask this stuff to everybody that comes across. What are the titles there? And when there is such a wide variance, just to rehash that point for a second, it's amazing the expectations that come with a title. And some people think that, a manager title means something, when in others it's a director or a VP or whatever it means, that title of it. Well, then you talk about the actual title of what we're doing and the role and the impact that can have. Well, if you're only seen as somebody who does demos, well, why on earth would marketing care, or product, or anything else? So the rebranding point that you made earlier, Chris, is super valid.
Yeah, love it.
Thanks for getting that up to speed. That's awesome. I lastly plug this in, and again, this is kind of a lesser point per se, but like I said, in my case, the time, because of the number of products that we have in our bag, that time to ramp really made a pretty significant impact for me. But I think when looking to hire into the pre-sales space, I tend to look for one of two things. If there's a unicorn, they have both, that's fantastic, but that doesn't always happen very often. But those two things are the top 2 points here. You got product knowledge and you got presentation skills. If one of those two things is present, I can typically work with the other and get them scaled up. Everybody's product situation is different, right? And I mentioned, we've got a wide bag. We've got that 15 plus products. You may or may not have that many. It might be more a targeted list. But whatever it is, your solution consultants have to spend time understanding the value of your solutions. This isn't a term, and this is where we initially started training people, because I came from the training consulting group. Like, oh, we'll go through our training that we give customers, and then they'll be good to go. No, that's how you use it. And what we do is significantly different. And this took several years really to feed into this too. It's not learning where to click and what it does. To an extent, yes, you still have to know how to navigate around. But the focus of the learning is on why that's important to the customer. And that takes time. What's the problem that they have that the solution solves for them? Why is your solution better than the competitors? That level of understanding takes time and really repetition to go through and learn from those conversations with customers to get there. From the presentation skill side of the house, you've got great demo from Peter Cohen, you got Demo to Win from Rob Reefstall. Like, those are great methodologies for demos that definitely have to be taught in that space. But the ability to convey a message effectively to your audience is a critical skill. How do they engage with the customer? How do they build rapport? What are the types of questions that they use and reframe to be able to get to the heart of what they're trying to say? Is their presentation crisp, clean, and perfect and crafted from a marketing perspective? Or are they authentic and human? Like, what is the preference in your organization? That's going to determine some of it too. Whatever that is, those skills have to be up to par. And I argue, like, if you're going to pick between the two of those, I'm gonna pick a presenter over someone with product knowledge every day, because to me, that's something that you don't want to necessarily stumble through the first half a dozen or so deliveries that you have to kind of get your feet, because those half a dozen deliveries may impact a sales rep's career. So for me, if I can find a presenter and I can teach them the product pieces, there are so many people that I know and I've hired on my team that didn't come from a background in understanding our solutions, but they know how to communicate effectively. They're key, and they continue to have success no matter what product that they have. There's always going to be intangibles too, the stuff that you can't necessarily put your finger on. I always hate interviewing because I tend to see the positive in everybody. And that's sometimes a good and a bad thing. You tend to trust your gut because people can look good on paper, but then when you get into asking those questions about how they're going to interact with people, there's a lot that can come up. My culture of helping others is the thing that I look for, and how they communicate their messages in an interview is going to be a real key piece of that. Highlighting things like helping a business grow and that they get a lot of value out of that. That's a good focus on people. And that's something that's important to me. I made a point in another interview not too long ago about be mindful of someone who's running away. from a position that they're in versus running toward your team. That's something, just like I said, be mindful. It doesn't mean that it can't work out, but it is something to be aware of if they're going to your team for the right reasons. And, really, like I said, I wanted to highlight this as far as the challenge, because for me, that timeline of 2 to 3 years, I lost 4 major people on my team prior to this. That was after I made my pitch the first time. You made a business case. I set time with the president, who I really got lucky. It was a 45-minute call, presentation in person. We talked for an hour and a half. It was really great. We got to the end of it, and they're just like, yeah, we don't have budget. So I believe in what you're doing here, but sorry. and came back to the table and, brought the information back again and looked at the finance opportunities and where leveraging what the industry is doing, not only just in compensation alone, because that report was a key factor in it to say, like, where we ranked on the scale of US based compensation, but the things that we were doing in addition to just the core functions of the job, that was the key to kind of, re-looking at that, break down the time spent with those other divisions and look at the influence you can have. To me, that was the biggest piece, to have that turn a corner. The other thing is, loss of senior resources. That's always going to be a challenge. Get to know your team's career aspirations, what you're trying to accomplish as far as comp or a team structure, and whether or not that aligns with those folks. Be honest. If it's not going to be a good fit with some of those people on your team who might be veterans, helps you better prepare and make the case for those headcount additions, because you're aware of those career aspirations ahead of time and you aren't blindsided by having 4 veterans leave all at once. Okay. Holy cow, there's a lot of chats that came through, or things that went in there when I was talking. So lots of a mess there to revise through. Wow. Okay. Systems engineers. Yeah, people got confused. Still, right? Sales infrastructure. That was our same bucket. You get confused based on what those titles are. Kim says there's a great fit for my team. Fabulous. Well, it's always fun finding a bench strength for that too. I don't think it's bad news for software background. Like I said, software strength and what it does naturally is build confidence. You are not nervous about what the customer is going to have asking questions. It's going to be got you. If you have a deep technical knowledge in the solution, it is valuable. So don't take where I said I lean towards presentation skills if I have to pick between the two, but I love someone who's confident in a product and they know what they're talking about, because the presentation skills, it's just fine tuning that delivery of it. But it is absolutely valuable to know a deeper technical side of it. The thing that I find though, and Chris and John, keep me honest, oftentimes after a few times of delivering, those solutions consultants, sales engineers say, well, gee, I really didn't need to know all that much. I don't ever go into that depth of space unless you got a niche customer that's got a specific question here or there.
So true, Tony. And I find like a lot of like our onboarding efforts are like, we need you to know everything, when at the end of the day, a lot of the time you don't use everything, right? Especially if you're doing it well. Yeah, so you don't want to build an onboarding program that's overkill and doesn't really set somebody up for success.
Sure. Okay, so I because I'm a nerd as far as like pop culture goes. So somebody throw in the chat if they recognize what this is from. Not Camelot. No. Good guess. John made a face. I wonder if he knows. Scott's got Dragon's Lair. Okay, so this is going back in time a little ways.
My nerd bona fides are intact.
So this is Dragon's Lair, is a motion capture video game back in the day. It was one of those that I don't know why I gravitated toward as a kid, but I mentioned this too. When you talk about the Dirk the Daring is the character's name, but to kind of recap a little bit of the stuff that I talked about, equip yourself to slay the dragon. So you want to prepare for the battle, understand the tools at your disposal, and aim high. So what do I mean by prepare for the battle? Understand where your team brings value beyond that current scope and engage with your stakeholders. The tools, find ways to reinforce what you're trying to achieve by data. Think the compensation workload report here. That's a really key one to help you in terms of the tools at your disposal. The reports, the details, the time to close, whatever you can prove in terms of your data, that's going to be important. And then aim high. So anchor that request with data. Justify ROI for your team by having those data points. if you've got added tools that you're looking to bring in from a budgetary standpoint, if it's headcount, if it's design of your team, whatever it is, make sure you've got the data to back it up, but then design and request that perfect state. I didn't get mine. We have a smaller version that we're still building towards, but aim with that perfect plan. What's that revenue impact going to be? What's the influence your team can have if it were in this perfect state? And then work backwards to what's feasible within the budget and your hiring practices. So I wanted to go through that, but I also am not alone here in this conversation. So I don't want to monopolize too much of our time. We got some time left here, but wanted to make sure that between Chris and John and myself, we can kind of answer questions that are out there. I know there's several that are Q&A in the chat here, and be able to make sure we get the most value for you guys.
All right, guys, we've got a question coming in for you. How do you correct pay decisions from the past? Someone is killing it and deserves a raise and wants one, but they are already overpaid for the role today. What can I do as their leader?
So I'll answer this in the context of what I had, because we had a pay band that was defined for the role, and based on that pay band, they were at the top of it. So similar scenario, right? They are doing well, but based on what they consider their role, they're at the high end of it. Well, I made the argument to say, well, is that the right role definition? Back to my original point on what is the job role? What is the description of the role? What is, when they're going to post it for a hiring, what are the responsibilities for that role? And I rewrote my job description, redesigned what that role expectation is in order to put us in a different structure so that we could have that pay band where we could pay folks for the work that they're doing. And I don't want to make an assumption on this, but if they are killing it and that's the main thing that they're doing, in addition to helping peers and helping sales grow and working with their partners in other divisions, that's the part of what I used in my expansion piece, was redefine what the role capability is beyond just the demos. And that gave me a little room to play with the bandwidth.
I'll add to that. That it sounds like what you're struggling with is there's not a meeting of the minds as far as the pay landscape. Okay, they perceive themselves as in one place in the pay landscape, and you're saying actually you're considerably higher than maybe you ought to have been in the past, and so on. So getting a meeting of minds on what the map looks like of the pay landscape can really help. That's where you can take something like the report and say, okay, so in North America, this is kind of the median experience has this kind of impact on average. And so you can sort of use that data or those data in order to get a meeting of the minds, right? As far as where they are and where they ought to be. The other thing to consider, though, is that the market's a thing, and if there's, even if they are overpaid by one measure, if they can compel the salary, if they can command the salary, then the market's a thing, right? It determines a lot of that.
Awesome. We have another one coming in. Alternatively, I have a tenured team member who is extremely knowledgeable, who is at the lowest paid on the team. How do you recommend advocating for that employee's pay equity?
I think that it's hard too, because you operate within the constraints of whatever the budget is. I think over the last few years, we've probably all experienced something of limited options in terms of, increases for the team. And I was always of the mindset that at a minimum, we should try and be, some percentage increase when they're exceeding their goals. If they're meeting the goals, that's a culture thing where if that means that they should have a cost of living increase every year too, and that's part of your structure, then so be it. But I think there's value in terms of reimagining what does that look like? Can you say if you're achieving the role and you're comfortable in the band that you're at, like your team is in a good space, well then maybe that achieved rating or whatever your rating scale is, if they're just doing the job well and not over exceeding their goals, maybe you start to partition some of that increase that could have been used for like a small incremental increase for everybody and make something more substantial for one. That's always the challenge, is trying to make the math work in the favor of those high producers. Because I think the other argument you could do, if you're doing it outside of like the scaled increase timeline, Talk about one-time compensation increases and make a justification based on the same market information that's in that report, and talk about what's the negative impact if they choose to go to another organization that's going to pay them, somewhere more than what they are today. That's a tough one. It really is, because budgets are always something you're going to have to.
Yeah, I'll share an experience I've had, because I had that exact problem over a couple of people on my team, and there's a couple things you need to make sure that you're what I call walking around the town square, holding the sign, telling everybody what that great person is doing, and you're doing it all the time, so that when I would say that the work starts way before asking for more comp. You're consistently aligning that individual with things that move the business forward and the executive minds. You're putting them on the MBOs. If you take PTO, you're letting them run your team meetings. You're doing things that just show that they are a high performer, so that when you go to the team, they just go, oh yeah, I've heard you talking about them a lot. And so that it's like a no-brainer, right? But that work starts from a management perspective. It starts much earlier.
May I also suggest, and once again, at the risk of becoming the pariah of the group, there is a lot of data coming in around quota for pre-sales, and performance-based compensation tends to sort a lot of this out, because the high performers get paid more. And so even if they're a junior member of the team, if you have a compensation structure that rewards high performers, it takes care of itself to a certain degree. And we had a session at Demo Fest on the massive positive impact that quota had on the minds of the team, mind you, not just on the bottom line, but on the morale of the team and all of that, of the pre-sales team, when personal quotas came in. So
Yeah, well said.
I'm dodging tomatoes.
Oh, but the thing about variable comp is it has to be something that's in control too. So a lot of what Tony, you've talked about with rebranding your team, making sure you're aligned with the right things. A lot of the time what you find is you look at the variable comp and you think, does my team actually have control over that? And once you solve those little problems, your high performance, all of a sudden they get to where they belong.
Also, by the way, little outliers. There was a question in the thing that I don't know we'll get to about outliers, strange outliers in the data that we found. One of the outliers is that people who carry quota, individual quota, make higher base salaries, not just higher OTE. They get higher base salaries. Yes.
Really?
And that was
still interesting.
Robust data.
Wow, that's
what was that, Tony?
Interesting find, man.
No, it is. It's very interesting, because I think it's the perception that we all have going into it, right? And I've said that for several years with my team, right? Like, the sales reps own the deals. If we're not involved in discovery and deals come our way, right? Like, how do we hold them to a close percentage? But I think the argument to me is, and we've started to do this already, be involved in more discovery calls, help them with strategy and how they want to approach deals, be a part of that process to make sure the demos that do come your way are qualified and have a higher propensity to close, which then would influence that individual quota level. So no, there's definite value to the conversation. That's a whole nother webinar though.
Yeah, we have another question coming in for you guys. As someone early in my career, what are your perspectives on base compensation percentage? Is it better to start higher percentage base and then try to work towards expanding your commission?
I guess I in a true solutions consultant mindset, like, I'd ask what's important to you. I mean, if you need a higher base, then obviously that's going to be a part of it. But that's the tough thing to consider, because I've always looked at the role in front of me as my base compensation is where I define my personal budget, and anything above and beyond that is savings, play money, whatever you want to call it. Your commission piece is typically less important in my mind. But that's my personal approach to it. I think everybody has to go that their own route.
Well, we have another one coming in here.
There's so many good questions.
Yeah, we have a lot. When redesigning, restarting role scopes or restating role scopes, what are your thoughts on specialists versus generalists and aligning to internal seniority or business units?
And there's so much to unpack in that one.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a major top of mind situation with this too, because I originally had a team of generalists. So we had like 200 plus sales reps in a couple divisions we support. I had 8 people to start. So they were required to be generalists to support that many of them. Over time, we scaled up the team. I've got 28 now. And we specialized into particular channels related to the areas that they deliver on. So tax, audit, advisory, firm management, as an example. What I'm finding though, is as we specialize, we got really good at having those conversations, but now we're shifting to, well, as an organization, we have this massive scale of products that integrate together, and that collective story is necessary. I have less generalists now to tell that story. So it really, like, what is the need of the moment? I would argue being able to tell a complete story at the top level and then pull in specific resources to be that specialist or depth of knowledge where needed was probably the argument I start to lean towards now.
Yep, I've been through the same thing, Tony. Actually twice. and we made shifts. We went from generalist to specialist, then we had to go back, and then there was acquisitions, and now we had a bigger story. You have to tell the whole story from the top, and then be able to go down and niche into one little area, you know.
Okay, let's do one more question before we end things up. How do I approach C-suite to advocate for compensation increase?
How do you approach? Well, I think that there's part of it is the first introduction you have with those folks, don't make it your pitch. So what I mean by that is get to know those folks, get to know who they lean on in their decision-making process, who are the stakeholders involved in, you know, making this pitch, who is it going to influence? And if you think about where that senior leader is going to be making that decision, who are they going to go to validate that this is indeed a necessary step? And I made the point slightly earlier, but I think identify and connect with those stakeholders and talk about the value that you bring to it today. And if you don't bring value to them today, well, I think that's got to be rectified before you get to that pitch level. Approaching it, I mean, if it's just directly like, how do I engage with them? Look at where your influence is today and use that as your catalyst. I feel like we could make more of an impact by X% increase in whatever their numbers are if we had this structure, this additional headcount, this resource, this technology, whatever that is. Look at it as we're trying to help the organization. That's what pre-sales does, right? We make a difference, whether that's customers, whether that's peers, whether that's the sales division, or any of the partner segments. We're there to help. So if you can go at it from that piece of, we want to make a difference in the company, I think we can do more. That's how I would approach the first step.
And I think that's the best way to land this plane, Tony. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Thank you all for the questions, the comments. Thank you, Tony, for your expertise, your experience, and how you got this accomplished. We obviously have something that could probably be an entire series. John, the research is incredible. You're really helping change lives. You're helping us all focus and giving us data to go to the table. So thank you so much, John.
So glad.
Consensus. I mean, it's really helping our entire, we're all advocates for pre-sales. We know what we do. It takes this level of work to help us out. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
So with that, go ahead and close. Appreciate all your time. And until next time.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
I would suggest everybody who's joining, connect with these folks on LinkedIn, continue the conversation, get in the Slack. John's got Demo Fest. He's got events all over the world. Connect with Tony. He's a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much.
See you, everybody.
Thanks all.
Have a great
See
one.
ya.